Millfield wasn't always drowning in fear. It was once a picture-perfect town, where laughter echoed down quiet streets, where the law was something people respected, not something they feared. But those days are long gone. Now, porch lights flicker like silent warnings, doors stay locked even in broad daylight, and the whispers of missing people linger like ghosts in the air. And at the center of it all, Officer Victor Blackwell. To the world, he was Millfield's golden cop, a man who shook hands with politicians, appeared at charity events, and smiled for the press. But behind closed doors, he was a king ruling through corruption. Bribes, intimidation, and secret deals fueled his empire. He didn't just enforce the law, he bent it, twisted it, controlled it. And anyone who dared to stand in his way, they simply disappeared. What really happened in Millfield? Stay tuned. Where are you watching from? Comment below, like, share, and subscribe. Millfield wasn't always haunted by fear. Once, it was the kind of American town where neighbors shared cookouts on summer evenings, where children played freely on tree-lined streets, and local law enforcement were trusted pillars of the community. People believed in the system back then. They respected the badge. But that was before the shadows crept in. Before the silence. Now, Millfield is a place where porch lights burn all night, where families whisper when discussing certain officers, where even a routine traffic stop carries unspoken dread. No one trusts the police anymore. No one dares to, because in Millfield, speaking up doesn't just bring trouble, it makes people vanish. Victor Blackwell was once considered Millfield's finest officer, or at least that's what the community believed. He knew how to work a room, shake hands at charity events, and flash that reassuring smile when cameras appeared. But beneath that polished exterior lurked something else entirely, a man who didn't uphold the law but manipulated it for personal gain. Millfield had become his domain, ruled through intimidation, bribery, and strategic alliances. Blackwell determined who faced charges and who walked free. He ensured cooperative criminals maintained their operations while those who defied him found themselves either behind bars or simply gone. His wealth accumulated rapidly, not from his modest police salary, but from protection payments, drug operations, and various corrupt schemes. He hadn't merely accepted bribes, he had architected an entire system dependent on them. Every king needs a right hand, and that's where Marcus Thornton entered the picture. Thornton wasn't just an officer, he was Blackwell's enforcer. If Blackwell wanted someone frightened, Thornton ensured they couldn't sleep at night. If a witness became problematic, Thornton guaranteed they never testified. His personnel file boasted numerous commendations for valor, but Millfield residents knew the truth. He was as dangerous as the criminals he claimed to pursue. When a local reporter began investigating discrepancies in police evidence handling and unexplained wealth among certain officers, his car was found burned to the frame outside his apartment building. 3 weeks later, he left town. Another time, a downtown business owner refused Blackwell's security fee. Within 48 hours, his establishment suffered a devastating electrical fire. The police report labeled it an accident, but everyone understood what had really happened. Thornton never questioned orders. He never hesitated. His role was straightforward: maintain the atmosphere of fear. And it worked perfectly. Not everyone within the department followed this corrupt path. Rachel Harper had joined Millfield PD with genuine ideals, believing in justice and public service. Initially, she had respected Blackwell, viewing him as a mentor worthy of emulation. That admiration didn't survive long. The first time she questioned why charges against a prominent developer were suddenly withdrawn, she was firmly advised to focus on her assigned cases. The second time she noticed seized drug money repeatedly disappearing from evidence storage, she received a stern warning. The third time, after witnessing Marcus Thornton severely beat a suspect in a parking garage and being instructed to report it as necessary force against resistance, she faced an impossible truth. It wasn't just one bad officer. The entire department was compromised. Rachel had to make a decision: conform like everyone else or risk becoming another disappearance statistic. Millfield had ceased being a community. It had transformed into a prison where citizens understood the unwritten rules: remain silent, look away, never challenge police authority. Because those who did rarely remained in town for long. Some tried. A handful of brave souls spoke out, but one by one, they either relocated or suffered unfortunate accidents. Eventually, resistance faded entirely. Or at least, that's what Blackwell and Thornton believed. What they failed to notice, what none of them realized, was that someone had already infiltrated their operation, patiently observing, documenting, and waiting for the perfect moment to bring everything crashing down. But would anyone within the department summon the courage to stand against Blackwell before it was too late? Millfield residents recognized the corruption controlling their town, but what they didn't know, what even the most corrupt officers hadn't detected, was that someone was already dismantling their operation piece by piece. Someone walking among them daily. Someone they overlooked, dismissed, and ignored. Her name was Eleanor Morgan. To casual observers, Eleanor appeared unremarkable, just another quiet employee in the records division at the Millfield County Courthouse. She wasn't a judge or an attorney. She wasn't even a clerk handling significant cases. Her position was even more mundane: an assistant in the archives responsible for filing documents, organizing case records, and ensuring old reports remained accessible when needed. She was invisible. And that was precisely her intention. Because behind the conservative blouses and meticulous filing, beneath the polite smiles and unassuming demeanor, Eleanor Morgan represented something far more dangerous than anyone suspected. She wasn't merely a courthouse employee, she was an undercover federal agent, and her mission was to dismantle the Millfield Police Department from within. Each day, she methodically reviewed legal documents, arrest reports, and case files. Superficially, she performed her assigned duties: cataloging records, processing paperwork, maintaining orderly archives. But beneath this routine, she searched for inconsistencies, patterns, and discrepancies, evidence that shouldn't exist or, more tellingly, evidence that had mysteriously vanished. Millfield's corruption wasn't merely rumored, it was documented in black and white. Court records altered, critical reports missing, cases that should have resulted in convictions mysteriously dismissed. Every document Eleanor handled potentially contained the key to unraveling the entire network. Most people would miss these subtle inconsistencies, but Eleanor wasn't most people. She had spent years studying criminals who believed themselves untouchable, and she knew that larger conspiracies inevitably contained flaws. Somewhere within this sea of falsified documents and manipulated reports lay the thread that would unravel everything. She simply needed to locate it. But Millfield's corruption extended beyond paperwork. It permeated the courthouse corridors where employees had learned to keep their eyes down and voices hushed. It manifested in the strained smiles of prosecutors who recognized their futility, who had stopped pursuing cases they knew they could never win. It lingered in the apprehension surrounding every conversation, in people's hesitation before mentioning certain names aloud. The system was broken. Everyone recognized this reality, but no one dared address it. No one except Eleanor. As she carefully examined the records, tracking each concealed transaction and buried case, she recognized one undeniable truth. Time was running short. Because in a town like Millfield, secrets never remained hidden permanently. The roadside diner stood nearly empty, with fluorescent lights buzzing softly against the late-night silence. Eleanor sat in a corner booth, fingers absently tracing the rim of her coffee cup. She hadn't come for a midnight meal, she had come for evidence. Michael Bennet slid into the seat across from her, movements stiff, eyes scanning the room before settling on her face. He appeared different tonight, exhausted, tense, like someone carrying an unbearable burden. He dispensed with pleasantries, reaching inside his jacket to produce a plain manila envelope, placing it carefully on the table between them. "This," he murmured, tapping the envelope once, "is what you've been searching for." Eleanor accepted it with steady hands but a firm grip. She extracted a single photograph, grainy, low resolution, but damning nonetheless. It showed two Millfield officers, a warehouse, and evidence bags being exchanged like ordinary business transactions. And in the background, partially visible beneath dim security lighting, Victor Blackwell. Bribery. Corruption. A direct connection between the police department and organized crime. Eleanor's stomach tightened. "Where did you get this?" she asked, voice calm despite the photograph's implications. Michael hesitated. "A source. Someone who wants this ended as badly as we do." He exhaled sharply, glancing toward the diner entrance. "But if I have this copy, that means Blackwell knows someone else does too." A chill settled in her chest. "You need to be careful," she warned. For the first time, Michael's composed facade cracked, his hands clenching on the table. "They're already watching me, Eleanor. My apartment was searched. My car's been followed. This." He gestured toward the envelope. "This is essentially a death warrant." Silence stretched between them. Eleanor's instincts urged her to tell him to leave town immediately, to run as far as possible, but she knew better. There was no escaping people like Blackwell. Michael released a shaky breath, fingers drumming once against the tabletop before he stood. "Keep it safe. If anything happens to me, this evidence cannot disappear." Eleanor met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them, a silent promise. Then, without another word, Michael turned and walked out the door. She should have stopped him. Should have said something more. But she didn't. And that was the last time anyone saw Michael Bennet alive. The records room remained quiet, the air heavy with the scent of aged paper and dust. Metal filing cabinets lined the walls, drawers packed with decades of police reports, court rulings, and case files, most long forgotten. But Eleanor Morgan wasn't interested in ancient history. She sat at her desk reviewing a file marked "closed." To anyone passing by, she appeared as just another overworked records assistant drowning in paperwork. In reality, she was hunting, searching for inconsistencies, cross-referencing details, tracking evidence that had mysteriously vanished. She had been cautious, never requesting too many files simultaneously, never drawing unnecessary attention. But tonight, something felt wrong. That familiar prickling sensation at the nape of her neck, like someone watching. Slowly, deliberately, she turned a page in the file before her. She forced her breathing to remain steady, but her pulse quickened because her instincts were correct. Someone was observing her. Across the room, standing near the doorway, Rachel Harper's eyes were fixed on her. Initially, Rachel hadn't given much thought to the quiet woman in archives. But gradually, she began noticing peculiarities. Why would a low-level records assistant request police reports from high-profile cases? Why did she seem so interested in files already marked resolved? And why did she always close her laptop whenever someone approached? Rachel's years of police experience had taught her to recognize patterns, and Eleanor's behavior raised questions. She hadn't reported her concerns to Blackwell or Thornton, not without concrete evidence, but she was watching carefully. And Eleanor knew it. Eleanor calculated her next move, then glanced up. Rachel remained in place, arms crossed, expression unreadable, not accusatory, not confrontational, simply observing with the practiced gaze of a cop who suspects something but lacks sufficient evidence for action. Their eyes met briefly. Eleanor debated her response, then opted for the only viable approach. She smiled, a harmless, polite, nothing suspicious here smile. Rachel didn't return the gesture. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, lips pressed thin, evaluating. After a lengthy pause, she turned and departed, but not before casting one final glance over her shoulder, a warning, a challenge. Eleanor released a slow breath, fingers tightening around the file edges. That had been dangerously close. Rachel wasn't foolish. If she hadn't already begun investigating, she soon would. And once that happened, Eleanor would no longer be an anonymous records assistant. She would become a threat. And in Millfield, threats didn't endure. The tension had been escalating for days. Eleanor sensed it in Rachel's lingering glances, in her seemingly coincidental appearances in the same hallways, the same rooms that should have been vacant. This wasn't coincidence. Rachel Harper was tracking her, and tonight, she was finished merely observing. The courthouse corridors stood nearly empty, overhead lights humming in the silence. Most employees had departed hours ago, but Eleanor remained at her desk, reviewing another confidential case file. Then came footsteps, deliberate, unhurried, stopping directly behind her. Eleanor didn't need to turn around to identify the visitor. Working late again? Rachel's voice carried a subtle edge that hadn't been present before. Eleanor looked up, maintaining a neutral expression. Someone needs to keep these records organized. Rachel didn't smile. She didn't move either, simply stood with arms crossed, studying Eleanor like a puzzle requiring solution. Eleanor set down her pen, tilting her head slightly. Something on your mind? Rachel leaned against the desk, fingers idly drumming the wooden surface. I've been thinking about an interesting pattern I've noticed recently. Oh. Yes, Rachel continued. I've worked in this courthouse long enough to recognize which cases matter, which files receive attention, which ones don't. And you, she raised an eyebrow, seem particularly interested in cases already marked closed. Eleanor produced a small chuckle. I'm simply thorough. Rachel didn't laugh. She didn't even blink, just watched and waited. For the first time, Eleanor realized this wasn't mere suspicion anymore. Rachel had observed too much. Yet she hadn't reported it, not yet, which suggested only one possibility. She wasn't certain where she stood. Rachel remained at a crossroads. She could alert Blackwell, Thornton, or any corrupt officer about her suspicions. But she hadn't, because something deep within her hesitated, questioning the system she had sworn to uphold. Eleanor needed time. I don't know what you suspect I'm doing, but I assure you, I'm simply performing my job, she said evenly, casually. Rachel tilted her head, studying her for an extended moment before finally pushing away from the desk. "Maybe," was all she said before turning and walking away. But Eleanor didn't relax. This confrontation wasn't concluded. Rachel remained vigilant, and now only one question mattered. When she finally made her decision, whose side would she choose? The courthouse stood as a monument to justice, or at least, that's what it represented in theory. Outside, chaos erupted. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed continuously, and protesters filled the sidewalks, some demanding accountability, others waving supportive signs for the officers facing charges. Inside, however, the atmosphere differed dramatically. The air felt heavy with something beyond anticipation. It carried the weight of certainty. Because Victor Blackwell believed he had already secured victory. He strode through the courthouse entrance as though arriving at a celebration held in his honor. His uniform remained immaculate, his posture confident, his smirk unapologetic. Behind him followed Marcus Thornton, Gregory Walsh, and several other officers, their expressions vacant, their movements disciplined. But Blackwell was different. His eyes showed no fear, his steps no hesitation. This wasn't a trial in his mind, merely a formality, a performance the public needed to witness before the system. His system dismissed the accusations, just as it always had. For years, Blackwell had manipulated the law, corrupted the system, and buried inconvenient truths. Today would proceed identically. He had secured the finest attorney's money could purchase. The genuine power players weren't present in this courtroom, they operated behind the scenes. So when he entered the chamber, he smiled confidently, because in his mind, this wasn't his day of reckoning, this was simply another demonstration that justice in Millfield was nothing but theatrical illusion. Across the room, District Attorney Samantha Reynolds gripped her pen so tightly her knuckles whitened. She had invested months constructing this case methodically, fact by fact, and now she watched it unraveling before proceedings even commenced. This morning, before arriving at the courthouse, she had received the call, a voice smooth, calm, dripping with quiet authority. "A warning. Drop the case, Ms. Reynolds. For your own protection." No explicit threats, no demands, just a simple statement of fact, a reminder that this case extended beyond corrupt officers. The implications reached deeper, darker, and if she persisted, they wouldn't merely take her career, they would take everything. She wanted to believe she could fight, that if she pushed hard enough, if she proclaimed the truth loudly enough, justice would ultimately prevail. But sitting in this courtroom, observing Blackwell's unwavering smirk, noticing the subtle nods exchanged between the judge and defense team, she experienced something she had previously refused to acknowledge: doubt. The kind that begins as a whisper in your mind, then gradually expands. Because what if the system was never designed to function properly? From across the courtroom, Blackwell watched her intently. He recognized the signs, how her fingers tightened around her pen, how her shoulders slumped imperceptibly. He knew that expression, the look of someone who had already accepted defeat. That's when he knew this case was effectively finished. So when the judge entered, when the courtroom settled, when the trial officially commenced, Blackwell reclined in his chair, relaxed, confident, waiting for Reynolds to concede, waiting for the system to perform its usual function, protecting him. Waiting for this case to collapse like all previous attempts. Because justice didn't exist in Millfield. Power did. And for years, Victor Blackwell had wielded it absolutely. What none of them realized, the rules of the game were about to change dramatically. The trial proceeded methodically, the courtroom air dense with anticipation. Every gallery seat was occupied, reporters, town officials, Millfield residents who had long abandoned faith in justice but attended nonetheless, hoping today might prove different. At the prosecution table, Samantha Reynolds sat rigid, jaw clenched, mind racing. She had anticipated Blackwell's arrogance, expected him to sit smugly knowing the system favored him. What she hadn't foreseen was just how brazenly he would display his confidence. Because right now, Victor Blackwell was playing his trump card with a self-satisfied smile. Blackwell's attorney rose, buttoning his expensive suit as he approached the bench. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, voice confident and rehearsed, "the defense wishes to submit new evidence conclusively proving my client's innocence." Reynolds' stomach clenched. New evidence? Impossible. She had examined every file, every report. Nothing could exonerate him unless. Her heart pounded as the attorney handed a folder to the judge, then turned, smiling directly at her. "We've obtained police reports and signed affidavits from key witnesses who now confirm that not only was my client uninvolved in any illegal activity, but these accusations stem from a deliberate campaign to discredit a decorated officer of the law." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The judge skimmed the documents, nodding slightly. "This constitutes serious evidence, Ms. Reynolds," he said, looking up at her. "How do you respond?" Reynolds' hands formed fists. She hadn't seen the folder's contents, but she knew what it contained: witness statements conveniently contradicting her entire case. Reports filled with manufactured details, altered timelines, fabricated surveillance footage. A mountain of lies disguised as truth, and the most disturbing part, it would appear legitimate. Blackwell turned slightly, catching her gaze, then smiled, not just a smirk, but a knowing grin that communicated clearly, "I told you that you couldn't touch me." Then, as if this represented nothing more than a minor inconvenience, he leaned forward, folded his hands, and actually chuckled, as though the entire proceedings were merely a stage production with him directing every scene. "Ms. Reynolds," his lawyer continued, "it's becoming increasingly evident that this case is built on misinterpretations, misunderstandings, and frankly, reckless accusations." Another pause, another smirk. "Or perhaps," the lawyer added, tilting his head, "a personal vendetta?" A wave of murmurs filled the room. The judge tapped his gavel twice. "Order." But the damage was done. All eyes focused on Samantha Reynolds, watching, waiting. Would she crumble under pressure like so many before her? Blackwell reclined in his chair, the picture of nonchalance, as if the entire case were merely amusing. Because to him, it was. He had witnessed this scenario repeatedly. The evidence might appear compelling, but evidence meant nothing when the game was rigged from the start. And in Millfield, the game had always been his to control. What he couldn't perceive was that, for the first time, the script wasn't his to write. The courtroom had belonged to Blackwell for years. He had dictated outcomes: who won, who lost, who disappeared. Today was supposed to represent just another victory, with his carefully crafted false evidence deployed and his attorney controlling the narrative. He already envisioned tomorrow's headlines: "Heroic officer vindicated. Another case buried, another win secured." And then the doors swung open. The sharp click of heels echoed through the silent chamber, slow, controlled, unwavering. All heads turned toward the sound. There she stood, a woman in a perfectly tailored black suit, her posture straight, her expression unreadable, radiating a presence that commanded attention without uttering a single word. Eleanor Morgan, but not as the quiet, unassuming records assistant people had ignored for months. Not as the invisible courthouse worker. She was something entirely different now. The gallery's shocked gasps, the uncertain murmurs, the way even the judge hesitated, unsure what would unfold next, it all culminated in one inescapable moment. Blackwell's smirk vanished. For the first time that day, he appeared distinctly unsettled. Eleanor advanced, her heel striking against the polished floor, her movements precise, controlled, like someone who had anticipated this moment for a very long time. The entire courtroom held its breath. She stopped at the prosecution table. Samantha Reynolds looked up, stunned. Then Reynolds turned to the judge and spoke, her voice steady despite the tension permeating the room. "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce a key figure in this investigation." A pause, the kind that pulls everything taut like a wire about to snap. Special Agent Eleanor Morgan of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The words landed like thunder. A shockwave spread throughout the room, a collective gasp echoing off the walls. But the only reaction that mattered, the only one Eleanor had awaited, was Blackwell's. His fingers twitched against the table. A muscle in his jaw tensed. For just a split second, his mask slipped. The atmosphere shifted because he recognized this wasn't a mere formality anymore. This wasn't his game. This was something entirely unexpected. And for the first time in his life, Victor Blackwell couldn't predict how it would end. The courtroom fell silent, not the calming silence of peace, but the suffocating stillness before a storm. Eleanor stood at the prosecution table, unwavering. The gravity of this moment wasn't lost on her. This was it, when Victor Blackwell's empire collapsed. She reached into her briefcase and extracted a small, unremarkable black flash drive. Nothing elaborate, nothing ostentatious, but lethal in its implications. She held it up. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear, confident, unshakable, "the prosecution wishes to present key evidence obtained during a federal investigation into the Millfield Police Department." The judge adjusted his glasses. "Proceed." Eleanor connected the drive to the courtroom's audio system and pressed play. Blackwell's voice filled the room. "Look, if you want things to operate smoothly, you understand the arrangement." A pause, ice clinking in a glass, a slow exhale. "You pay, we look the other way. No interference, no complications, no problems." Another pause, then his voice lower, colder. "But if I discover you're holding back, if you try to be clever, you know the consequences." The courtroom erupted, gasps, shocked whispers, reporters frantically taking notes, fingers flying across phone screens. A defense attorney jumped to his feet. "Objection. This recording could be manipulated. There's no way to verify." Eleanor raised a single finger. "Not yet. Because there was more, much more." She produced a smartphone with worn edges and a cracked screen, the last device Michael Bennett ever recorded on. She placed it on the table with deliberate care, as if honoring its significance, not merely plastic and metal, but truth incarnate. She activated the screen. The video began, and the entire courtroom watched as the deception unraveled. The footage appeared dark, grainy, a shaky frame, heavy breathing. Michael's voice, low, urgent. "If this ever becomes public, I need people to know the truth." Sudden movement in the shadows. A man kneeling, hands raised. "Please, I didn't do anything." A gunshot, a single deafening burst of light. The man collapsed. Four officers stood over him, unmoved, unconcerned. One of them, Marcus Thornton, spat on the ground, moved the body. Nobody saw anything. The screen went black. Then Michael's final words. This is how they operate. This is how they've always operated. For 5 complete seconds, nobody spoke, nobody moved. Then chaos erupted. The gallery exploded with voices. Reporters shouted questions. A juror covered their mouth in horror. The judge pounded his gavel, demanding order. Eleanor didn't flinch. She turned and locked eyes with Blackwell. For the first time, he wasn't smirking. For the first time, words failed him. His fingers curled into fists, knuckles white, jaw clenched, desperate, cornered. He opened his mouth, perhaps to deny, perhaps to protest, but nothing emerged. Because he knew the game had concluded. The system he had controlled, the lies he had constructed, the power he had wielded, it had all just disintegrated. Eleanor stepped closer, lowered her voice to ensure only he could hear. Not so untouchable now, are you? Blackwell's world had just burned to ashes, and Eleanor Morgan held the match. For a man who had lived his entire life believing himself untouchable, this situation was incomprehensible. Victor Blackwell had controlled Millfield for years, pulling strings, silencing threats, burying evidence. The law had always bent to accommodate him, never the reverse. But now he was trapped, with nowhere to turn. He recognized the truth. The courtroom descended into chaos, people shouting, reporters scrambling, the judge's gavel pounding as he demanded order. But Blackwell wasn't listening. He couldn't. His mind raced desperately, searching for an exit strategy, an escape route, but none existed. Not this time. His empire crumbled around him, and for the first time in his life, he experienced something entirely unfamiliar: genuine fear. Then instinct took command. Blackwell shoved his chair backward with such force it crashed to the floor. In a blur of movement, he lunged, not toward his attorney, not toward Eleanor, but toward the exit. Gasps erupted as Blackwell bolted toward the courtroom doors. Pure survival instinct drove him, no thought, no strategy, just desperation. He barreled down the aisle, knocking a spectator aside. A woman shrieked. A reporter stumbled backward, their camera clattering to the floor. Everyone around him froze in shock, because this wasn't the confident, untouchable man they had feared for years. This was a cornered animal, frantic and dangerous. Just as his hand reached for the door, a voice cut through the commotion. "Stop him." The command barely registered before figures moved, a dark blur of federal agents converging. Blackwell managed barely 2 more steps before impact, a tackle straight to his torso, driving him to the ground. His body slammed against the polished courtroom floor with a brutal, resounding thud. Groans escaped his throat as multiple hands pinned him down, wrists twisted behind his back as cold metal snapped shut around them. Handcuffs, his own kind, the same restraints he had placed on innocent people without hesitation. The irony wasn't lost on him. Fury blazed in his eyes as he thrashed, struggling against the agent's weight. "This is a goddamn setup," he spat, voice wild, desperate. "You can't do this. I own this town." Eleanor approached, looking down at him, composed and resolute. "Not anymore," she said simply. And just like that, his reign concluded. As they hauled Blackwell to his feet, his breathing ragged, his face flushed with rage, Eleanor felt the weight of what had transpired. For years, Millfield had suffocated under corruption, and today, justice had prevailed. But deep inside, a question lingered: Was this truly the end, or was Blackwell merely one component of a much larger conspiracy? Because men like him rarely acted alone, and if experience had taught her anything, it was that corruption never dies easily. The courthouse doors burst open. The people of Millfield had awaited this moment for years. They had existed under perpetual fear, watching their community sink progressively deeper into corruption. They had whispered in back alleys, exchanged nervous glances whenever police cruisers passed. But today they witnessed justice firsthand. Blackwell and his officers were escorted out in handcuffs, badges removed, power stripped away. Reporters thrust microphones forward, cameras flashing, capturing the downfall of men who once believed themselves above accountability. A cheer erupted from the crowd, a roar of triumph. Some wept, relief washing over them. Others embraced, their voices lost amid jubilant noise. Justice. For the first time in years, Millfield felt hope's return. Eleanor stood on the courthouse steps, observing everything unfold around her. She should have felt victorious, should have felt relieved. Instead, she experienced something colder, a whisper of doubt nagging at her consciousness. Then her phone rang. She hesitated momentarily before answering. Static. A pause. Then a voice, deep, calm, almost amused. You believe you've won. A chill traveled down her spine. The surrounding crowd faded to background noise. This, the voice continued, smooth as silk, was merely the beginning. Eleanor's grip on the phone tightened. Who is this? She demanded, though she already knew the speaker wasn't bluffing. A low chuckle. Enjoy your victory, Agent Morgan. A click. Silence. Eleanor lowered the phone slowly, her heartbeat steady but instinct screaming. Because she knew it wasn't over. Not even close. Somewhere far from the courthouse, beyond flashing cameras and cheering crowds, a man sat in a dimly lit office. His face remained hidden in shadow, city lights flickering against the window as he raised a crystal tumbler of whiskey to his lips, taking a measured sip. The phone on his desk still vibrated softly from the terminated call. He smirked, unconcerned, unruffled, because Blackwell had been merely a pawn, and Eleanor Morgan had just stepped onto a much larger chessboard. As Eleanor stared at the phone in her hand, the weight of battles yet to come settling upon her, one question echoed in her mind: who truly pulled the strings? Because in Millfield, justice wasn't something you simply achieved. It was something you fought for, every single day. And the war? It had only just begun. The story of Millfield isn't just about corruption, it's about power, control, and the dangerous consequences of silence. It reminds us that injustice doesn't thrive in darkness alone, it survives when good people look the other way. The fall of Victor Blackwell proves that no one is untouchable, but it also reveals a deeper truth. When corruption is rooted in a system, taking down one man isn't enough. The real battle isn't just about exposing the guilty, it's about changing a culture built on fear. For those who have ever felt powerless in the face of injustice, Millfield's story is a warning and a call to action. The moment we stop questioning authority, the moment we accept wrongdoing as just the way things are, we become part of the problem. Change starts with courage, with people like Eleanor Morgan, those willing to stand against forces far larger than themselves. But the question remains: is justice ever truly won, or is it a never-ending fight? Where are you watching from? Comment below, like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories.